Hello, everybody, and welcome to your daily dose of the Grease Let's Talk About It podcast. I am Tony Lynch. I am your host, and I just want to say, for those of you that are going to be tuning in today, thank you for tuning in. And do me a favor, if you know someone who can benefit from the conversation that we're about to have or have had, please share this with them. And if it's your first time tuning in, do me a favor, head over to my YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification, so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. And I have a really great guest for you guys today, and hopefully you guys will enjoy. Sit back, and before I bring my guest up here, I would like to say that this is for educational purposes only. And if you're struggling, trust me, we have resources. Reach out. We'll get you the right help that you deserve and need. Now, without further ado, I'm going to bring on my next guest. So please, you guys, help me welcome my next guest, Miss Desiree Shafman. How we doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm
Thank you for
doing
having
well.
me.
Did I pronounce it wrong?
No, you did it
Okay.
right.
I was about to say, sometimes these things happen, right?
That's okay. We're good. We're good.
Well, welcome to the show today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
You most definitely, most definitely. Now, before we get started, introduce yourself. Tell people where you from and about the work that you do.
Okay. I am from New Jersey originally. I grew up right over the river from New York City
Okay.
in a, you know, very tight-knit community, very supportive community. Um, the work that I do stems from all the way from childhood. So when I was when I was young, around 5 years old, I started experiencing my first grief encounter with grief. It wasn't because I lost somebody; it was because I lost a lot of my freedom at the time. There was an adult that came into my life, and I found myself becoming more and more isolated. And so I spent a lot of time in my room looking out the window at the world as opposed to actually engaging with the world.
Mm,
That kind of set me up for creativity because what else do you do? When
very
you're sitting
true.
here,
Very
you
true.
read. I listen to music. I like to dance. I have my mom's stack of 45 Motowns. And then she bought me a desk and I started drawing a lot. And I guess it was instinctive. As children, we learn how to survive, right? We learn how to overcome our obstacles. And the best way for me to do it was to draw. And so I kept drawing and drawing and drawing. And usually my paper was down on my desk. And then one day I realized I picked it up and there's all the magnetic, letters and things like that. And I could never
Mhm.
spell my name because there's not enough E's. So I took a piece of paper drawing that I had and I kind of tacked it up, with the magnets. And at the time, I'm sure I didn't realize it. But now I realize that, seeing something face to face as you're working on it is a lot different than having it on a piece of paper. So it was more of a communication thing that started happening. Um, Again, I'm sure I didn't realize the effects of that then. So I I really learned to rely on creativity at that time for establishing my identity because
Mhm.
when you're not around people, it's kind of hard to, you know, be who you are. Like you don't know how things are going to affect you yourself and how you grow and evolve. You
Right.
really need that interaction with people. So most of my interaction was with being creative and my drawings. So fast forward to junior high. At the end of junior high, just beginning of high school, I lost my grandmother.
Mm,
And that was the first real sense of, wow, I didn't know I can feel this deeply.
right.
I didn't know that hurt and loss and that empty kind of feeling. Didn't know what to do with it. Um, from high school through the end of college, I lost both sets of grandparents, both parents, an uncle, and several friends. And what kept happening was is that somebody would get sick and have cancer, and it's a long process, and it's a very difficult
Mm,
process. It involves your whole family and everybody else that was blessed to help us. Um, as that person's life ended, the next person would get diagnosed, and so it was this kind of overlapping of anticipatory grief and then grief. And I was never able to um, process any of it, right? Because it's like, oh, here comes the next wall. Here comes the next wall. Here comes the next wall. And I was never able to really find my way through that. And so I really struggled. And, but there are blessings along the way. I mean, there's always people in the world that just, they're there, and they're there with, all the support that you can give. Um, in high school, one of my very best friends also had a life-threatening illness. And so that was a whole other thing that it was hard to think about what could happen. And so we really just kind of dealt with a moment to moment thing. At least I did. And she's here today. She's made it through. So that was a really wonderful thing. But it still had its, had its weight to it. When I was in college, I had a professor who was a Vietnam vet, and he was also he taught illustration. So a lot of it had to do with, here's a story, read it, draw it, illustrate it, and tell me something. Tell it from a perspective that nobody else is going to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of this unique twist on a visual perspective of the story. So it was a really nice way to jump into metaphors. And I think metaphors are really what helps me get through a lot of the loss. And from then until this day, and not just in art, but also in nature and different places like that. So he actually, he said, Des, he said, you don't have to come to class. Let me know when you're okay. Come when you're fine. If not, we'll get together and I can critique your stuff and keep you, rolling. But don't stop drawing. Don't stop. I said, okay. And so I did. I kind of wobbled my way through. And then, so my dad died my sophomore year. And then my senior year, my mom was really battling with colon cancer. And supposed to graduate in June. And I got the call in May, just before Mother's Day. And you got to come home. It's not happening. It's okay. So I went home, and I remember the plane ride and just thinking about how after losing all these people, I mean, we've talked, and you know this too, your identity keeps shifting. It's certain responsibilities that you have to take on. There's certain absences that you might have to fill. Just the logistics of, what do you do with the house? What do you do with your, all this stuff, and the logistics of, just the whole dying process is it was a lot, and I was so young. I'm like, there's nobody here to teach me anything. I don't understand this. So I went home, and I remember my best friend picking me up at the airport and kind of explaining to me what to expect. And I remember walking in, and the living room had been set up, with the hospital bed and everything else. And I remember going in, and she was asleep, and I looked at her, I'm like, that's not her. This doesn't look like her. Her body's different. Her coloring was different. Everything about her looked different until she woke up and opened her eyes. And then I was like, okay, that's Mom. And she wound up going into the hospital, even though she wanted to pass at home, but we wound up bringing her to the hospital. And it was right around Mother's Day. And she said, I promise you I'm not going to die on Mother's Day. And I'm like, just, if you have to go, it's okay. It's okay. And she was in and out of a coma, and Mother's Day came and Mother's Day went, and we could see her really struggling. And one of her friends, I think, I can't remember who it was, said, Linda, it's not Mother's Day anymore. And within like 10 minutes, she was gone. It was almost like she had to, she was fighting just so she didn't leave us on Mother's Day. And so it was just like, so I went back to school, and a couple of weeks later, I was sitting in graduation at the church and sitting in the row, and they called my name, and I'm like, oh, I can't. I feel so awkward. I don't feel right within my body. I feel like I'm this alien because I'm not really present.
Right.
And I remember kind of hearing this cheering going on, and I looked up in the stands, and here was my two of my very best friends, Teresa and Amy, and a couple of other people that really meant a lot to me. And they had come to my graduation as a surprise to me. So it was like, oh man, like just felt the support. And I've always been lucky in that sense. I've always had people, whether they were knowledgeable about grief or not, it didn't matter. All that mattered is that they were there.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times my friends, they were just like, hey, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. Let's go for a walk. Let's, one of my friends actually brought me to church, and I'm not a big churchgoer, and it was a Unitarian church, and the whole sermon was based around the music of Bach. And I just remember sitting in the back, just bawling my eyes out with her. Didn't have to say anything. At the end, we got up, we left, and I'm like, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That kind of anchored me. So for me, art was a way to express myself. It was also a way for me to define myself. And for a long time, the only way I could define myself was through grief. And that really bothered me because I had worked really hard to get to where I was. I was really a good student in all of the schools I've been to. But I worked really hard, and I was starting to find my artistic voice, my creative voice. But then grief came and completely changed that voice.
Yeah.
I went from doing this really colorful work to doing this very soft, subdued, lonely, absent of life. Like there was no people in it. It was just maybe a shaft of light, a hint of the existence of somebody, but never of the person themselves.
Right.
And for years I did that. And I was like, oh, trying to get it out, trying to get it out, trying to get it out. Because it's like, we have to tell our story, right? I mean, we have to be able to honor those that we love and also honor our place within that.
Right.
And the connection that we have with them. And so for a long time, I thought that the connection was broken. Oh, I can't talk to mom anymore. I can't talk to dad anymore. And in reality, I can't. But David Kessler, I'm not sure you know who he is, but he said, really yeah, he's wonderful, isn't he?
Yes.
He said that grief is a challenge to the connection. And that really changed everything for me. I'm like, oh, the connection is not broken. I just have to find a way to accept what happened and find other ways to keep that connection open. And part of that, right? And part of that was through, part of that was through drawing and not letting them be forgotten and not letting these emotions be forgotten. Anyway, I had a class. My last class in college was color theory. And I left it for the end because it was I had heard about how difficult it was. And I'm like, oh, got to take it now. I have no choice. And it was actually the class that probably saved my life. I started, we had to take, it was called a music transposition piece. And we had to take Vivaldi's Four Seasons and put it to color, shape, placement of shape and color, how different tones and notes within the music, like what does a C minor on an oboe look like? What color is it? Shape is it? How does it go through the music? How does it go through your visual composition? It was excruciating. It was so hard.
Understood.
I think I got a good grade just for effort. I tried. And it was probably one of the most challenging artistic endeavors I have ever been through in my life. So I get out of college, went to school in Savannah, Georgia, at Savannah College of Art and Design, and I moved back up to New England. And I wound up in this small, it was called Cozy Oaks. It was a little cabin on the side, on the edge of a swamp. Beautiful place, very quiet, exactly what I needed.
Mhm.
And I tried to paint. I tried to keep painting, and I couldn't do it. I was just completely blocked. I was separated from the one thing that really helped me to survive.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, how do I bust through this? And I love music, absolutely love music. So I started going, okay, I'm gonna keep doing this color theory project and see what I can get out of it. And so, I was transposing rock and roll and jazz and, it's like blues, things that I really stuck to. I mean, I like classical music, but I'm not really bonded with it like I am with
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I started understanding and thinking about the vibrations of colors.
Mm.
And color is one of those things that is constantly changing because light is constantly changing.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we did in color theory class, it was really interesting because she said, okay, if you have a square, solid blue square, I want you to stare at it. It's on a white background, stare at it. And then after so many seconds, look to the white wall. And what happens? Well, the blue square, what you see becomes a yellow square.
Mm.
So it's really interesting. It's like, oh, so in relating that to grief, if I'm blue, feeling blue, right? I'm feeling down.
Yeah.
There's another side to that that's coexisting at the same time as I'm feeling this. And that other side to it is not being blue. It's being happy or being, lighter than blue, just being more
Mhm.
with my life. So those kind of things really helped me out. Um, I wound up getting married in 1991 and had our daughter a year after, and we moved to the woods. Lived in an army tent for a year while we were building a house with a little baby in New Hampshire. Um,
Okay.
no water, no running water, or anything like that. It was really, pioneer.
It's how you're a woman.
I was doing it. Yeah.
That.
Some of the best memories of my life, though. It was really quite a thing to do. But my husband and I, after I had my son, excuse me, my husband and I were in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and he wanted to go into this music store that had instruments. And I walked in and I started crying. And he's like, what's the matter with you? I'm like, I don't play an instrument. I I don't know what to do with myself. I don't play an instrument. I'm really sad about that. He said, well, I'm gonna go look at the guitars. Why don't you go look around? And if something calls to you, we'll get it. We'll buy it. And then you can learn how to play. Okay. So I went up and down the aisles. I'm not a wind instrument person. Strings, my fingers aren't, they're not agile enough, I guess, to play. And a drum set was just like, no, that's too much for me. And then all the way down at the end was a really large display actually of djembe drums and other West African drums, junjuns. There was congas, the whole Cuban section. I'm like, oh, and I kind of got goosebumps. I'm like, oh, well, that's really fun looking, but intimidating at the same time.
Yeah.
So he said, well, what'd you find? I'm like, all right, I'm going to get a drum. I want a hand drum. So he said, okay. So I picked out the most bland, like just round, simple drum, djembe drum I could find. It was a Remo, so it didn't have a skin for a head. It had a synthetic head. And brought it home and had it in the corner of it was kind of kitchen / studio. And a girlfriend of mine came over for tea and said, whose drum is that? So that's mine. She said, do you play it? I'm like, no, I don't know how to play it. Maybe we should get a women's drumming group together. Okay. So she called a few weeks later. She said, I found these two wonderful women, Grace and Lindsay Schust, in New Hampshire. And they were like a direct line to Baba Ulatunji and Secret Depajo and all kinds of amazing cream of the crop drummers. And they came and they were so patient with us. And they taught us how to play as a group. And gosh, I think it was 2, 3 years we were together like that. And we would perform out for the community and just had a lot of fun. So at that time, I was doing those lonely, quiet paintings. Everything changed because I don't read music. And so the way that the West African rhythms were taught to us was by words. So a drum has 3 sounds, your bass, your tone, and your slap.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have a word for your right hand and your left hand. So your tones are go and do. Your slaps are pa and ta. And your bass is gun and dun. And so to learn a rhythm, it might be gun, go, go, do, gun, go, do. And so when you hear that, you know where to put your hands, right? So in order for me to understand even the words, I started coloring in the little box. All the bases were blue or purple, depending on which hand. Then red or orange were the slaps, depending on which hand. And then I think it was green was the tones, green and blue for each hand. And so when I started doing that and started reading the lines of music, somehow it translated into my painting and everything broke apart. The whole thing broke apart. No more. There was so much energy and life and color and shape and movement to my paintings. And what I started doing was dancing to a lot of West African rhythms. Because how can you not? I mean, it's like impossible not to. They're just so intricately laced, beautiful, heart-grabbing rhythm. Like they filled my whole body. And so then I would start dancing with black paint to get just the movement of the rhythm into my painting. And then I would go over it with the different colors. Again, sort of like I was transposing music, but in a much freer way. And so that's still the style that I'm in now. And what happened was, when I'm not sure if you've played in a drum circle before, but I had never done that before. And the support that's there, the unspoken support that's there, and the more drummers that are there, the more anchored I felt. And I felt like I was a part of something that was just so positive and so inclusive. And no matter how weird I felt about myself inside, about other things, that went away there. That didn't exist. And so I got addicted to playing the drum. And, for years, it was just really a steadfast, companion to my painting. Fast forward. Again, I'm not looking at my grief, right? I'm trying to hold my grief over here and be Desiree, be who my identity. We moved out to Washington State. I'm out on the Pacific West Coast now. And so that was a little bit of a change, but I really love it out here. There's just so much nature and, it's just a beautiful place to be. Mm-hmm. And in 2015, life imploded again. And I found myself in front of a life coach because I didn't know what else to do. I'm like, I'm so tired of therapy. I don't want to talk about any of this anymore. I need to know how to go forward. And so a friend of mine suggested I talk to a life coach, which I'd never heard of before. So I remember like a couple nights before, I wrote this whole list of all these things that happened to me in my life that were really difficult. And I brought it with me and I handed it to them. And I said, I don't want to talk about any of this stuff. I said, but you need to know that this is a part of who I am. They're like, okay. And so, it was like 2 pages of stuff. And so by the end of it, it was like, okay, Des, well, what do you want in life? And I'm like, I want your job. I don't know where it came from, but it's like, I want your job. And they were like, well, okay, here's some schools, check them out. Next thing I know, I found myself enrolled in IPEC and went through that. And I majored in grief there, of all things, because it was business, business coaching or health coaching. And then they said grief. And I was like, oh, maybe that's maybe that's my path. Maybe because I know all of this stuff, because I've experienced it all. Maybe this is where I need to be. And so I learned a lot and I coached for, a couple of years. And then I had some health issues. I developed late onset epilepsy. And so, we moved and, life happens. And I got kind of drifted away from coaching for a little bit.
Mhm.
And then last year I decided, okay, I'm going to get my ICF certification. So I'm ICF certified. And I also wanted grief certification. So I signed up with Dora Carpenter. I don't know if you know her from the Institute of Professional Grief Coaching.
Yeah.
An amazing woman, amazing program. And so I'm now an official certified grief coach. Um, and my mission is to help people, especially kids, especially in those junior high, teenager, early 20s, to understand what grief is before it hits.
Mhm.
Right? Like, this
Yeah.
is what may happen. This is what you may feel like. There's no rhyme or reason. You can't follow me. I can't follow you. It's different for everyone.
Right.
But I can support you. And these other things can support you, and these other people can support you, and just really educate people as far as what resources are out there for people to use, right? I mean, it's so important. I remember not having any resources. I remember sitting in a cemetery in Savannah, Georgia, bawling my eyes out because I wanted to be alone. And I had roommates, so it was the only place I could go. Plus, it was cool there. And when you cry so hard you can't hear, or like nothing's around you, everything kind of drifts away.
Yeah.
As I started coming out of that place, I realized there was somebody sitting next to me, and I was kind of annoyed. Like, why can't I just be left alone? And so I stopped crying, and I didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything either. Well, he didn't look at me. He said, "Hi, my name's Francis." I said, "Hi, I'm Des." He says, "I hope it's okay that I'm sitting here." I'm like, "You don't want my answer to that right now." I was like, "Well, I just wanted to be alone." He goes, "I get it. I get it." He says, "If you don't want to talk, that's fine. I just want to make sure you're okay." Okay, great. I'm okay. I'm not okay. And so the story unfolded. He was very easy to talk to. He was a wonderful man. And at the end, he said, "You know what?" He said, "I have 2 sessions left with my counselor." He said, "I'm going to call him up, and because I want to give them to you, because you need them more than I do." And I'm like, wow, what a gift.
Mhm.
And I remember going to the counselor and telling him everything that had gone on. And he was like, "You're doing pretty good." I'm like, "No, I'm not. That's not what I want to hear." But I don't think that there was a lot of grief support back then, other than maybe a church, which I didn't go to. There wasn't a lot there. There wasn't that I knew of.
Right.
Like now, there's so many people like you yourself and what you do, and other people that, help support people who are going through similar things and similar experiences that they
Mhm.
went through. And so I've developed a program that uses different um, art forms for people to learn how to get in touch with those deep feelings that we have. So what I learned with creativity and grief, they're both processes, right? Grief is a process, creativity is a process.
Yes. Yeah.
Process requires action. And so I'm like, okay, here we go. And then there are things like self-exploration that are
Mhm.
in both of them, right? It's really required in grief. It's like, who am I now that this piece of my life is no longer here?
Right. Right.
Right? How do I define that emptiness? How do I define that place? There's things like resiliency. You've got to be able to figure out a way to feed yourself
Mhm.
emotionally, physically, even too. I mean, you just don't want to eat. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to go to work. It's really difficult to, as you know, put yourself back in the world again
Right. Right.
so that you can exist from day to day. I mean, I had to work. I had to make money to survive, but it was like really difficult. Vulnerability is a big one. In grief, I don't even have to explain that. In art, creating, I put a blank canvas on my easel. I've done it, for almost 50 years now. More than that, 55 years now. And I still feel vulnerable. It's like, wow, that's a big white space, and I've got to commit. You know, I put my first mark down, and from that point on, I have to commit to that mark. I have to have that conversation with
Mm.
that mark.
Mm. I love
Right?
that. I
And it's
love.
the same in grief. It's like, okay, I'm feeling I'm feeling really crappy right now, and I'm feeling angry. I'm really, really angry. Anger was a big part of it. It was like a real big part of it. And what do I do with that anger? What can I possibly do with that anger? There's nobody there to be mad at.
Right.
How do I process that? And so, courage. You have to have the courage to take the action in both of them. You have to have confidence in yourself or be able to build that confidence in yourself.
Mhm.
Um, faith, faith that you can do it, faith that
Yes.
you can survive this, and that not only that you can survive it, but that you can make your life exactly what you want to make it in honor of your loss
Right.
instead of being kind of sidetracked by that loss. And so I've written a program that's really good for any age. Sometimes we use clay, sometimes we use paint, sometimes we sing, sometimes we dance, sometimes we drum. Um, all these different, using watercolor is totally different than using oil paint. It brings out different things
Right.
because of the nature of the medium. Like clay is really good for anger, really good for that, and inflexibility. So if I hand somebody a lump of clay and I say, here, kind of knead it while I'm talking to you about this, project that we're going to do. And they'll sit there with this kind of cold, hard piece of clay that's very rigid. And as you work it and work it and work it, it becomes pliable. And so if you apply that to yourself, it's like, okay, at least for me, when I was grieving and really in the midst of it, I was like, ugh, trying to hold everything in. I was like, just trying to be normal, trying to keep all these emotions from just flowing out, which is the worst thing to do, as we know now.
Yes.
Um, but to kind of use that clay as a metaphor, it's like, we can do something with ourselves. We can help ourselves by taking action to soften that up so that we're not as rigid and we're not as hard and we're not as self-protective. You
Right.
know, that self-protection thing was really hard. So my goal is to get it into every school, first in Washington State, and then we'll see where we can go from there. Um, I'm also working on a 36-foot long mural. It's 6 feet high, it's 36 feet long, and it's a traveling mural. It's not
Okay.
a mural it's not for galleries. I did the whole gallery scene. I've sold some work. I had my own gallery in Seattle for a little while with my husband, and I've sold some pieces, but I realized that a lot of my work it's not really decorative, even though it can be. It's
Mhm.
more, "Oh, this was in my head, and I gotta get it out, and this
Right.
was the situation that I'm trying to process." So, it's hard for me to sell some of them. I mean, I have a bigger personal collection than I do ones that I've sold because they still help me process things that have happened a long time ago.
Mhm.
And, it's just I just feel that I need to use this big painting to bring around and teach people how to find their voice, how to express things that are important to them. And part of it has to do with grief as well. So it's kind of a merging of my grief experiences, my grief education, and my art, who I am personally as an artist and what I know art can do for people.
Right.
So,
I had a question because I love the fact, listening to your creative journey, and it brought me back to when I was a child too. I love drawing, right? And I love being creative. I love and when you're that young and you have that creative flow going, I realized that now, looking back on it now, a lot of my art reflected the things that I was going through, right? And I loved illustrations. I love drawing comic books. I love drawing portraits. Like I could look at, say for instance, if I saw you walking down the street or something, right? And it'd be a couple seconds. I could sit there
you're
and draw. Well, and you'll never even know, right? Because
yeah,
but that's the way that I always view things, right? Life. I guess it was just a sense of understanding how raw life was and
yeah,
how beautiful it could be if you see it for what it was, right? And not for what you wanted it to be, but for what it was. And then to be able to understand the vulnerability of a blank piece of paper or a blank canvas. And I can relate to what you said that, and when you said that, I was like, man, how many times do we as human beings, when we're going through something, because grief has a way of making life blank
yeah,
and saying, this is where you have to be vulnerable. I often see what happens, and I could be wrong, but people look at that vulnerability and they're afraid to go in and express their grief, right? Because it's unfamiliar. They're
yeah,
not, they're not sure about the colors, of what their life is starting to portray,
hmm,
right? And so oftentimes, and I've done this, I we can result back to a survival mode.
yeah,
And that's in that survival mode, everything is black and white. There's no gray area. It's either this or it's this.
hmm,
And if I choose this is more familiar to me over here. But if it happens to cross over into the black area, I can adjust to that. They don't see the rainbow in between.
hmm,
Oftentimes we say, oh, that's the gray area. No, well, there can be a gray area, or you can look at it and go, you know what? I'm going to do what Desiree did, and I'm going to put the waves in there. I'm going to paint my grief. Just allow yourself to flow, right? And see where it goes from there. And because your reality does change, right?
hmm,
Every relationship that we have, every loss that we experience, life changes in a different way. When I found myself stuck, it's because I didn't know who I was,
yeah,
right? Or I was afraid of who I was going to become because I
mm,
was so used to being what I was that it was a safe place.
yeah,
It was a place where I can go to and you couldn't hurt me. Life couldn't touch me. At least I thought so anyway, right? But I was proven wrong. I was definitely proven wrong, right? It's like, no, I'm going to do this. And then life was just coming there and go, oh, you forgot to close this spot up, Tony. And
yeah,
they would come in there and just start tugging at me. And then after a while, when I didn't acknowledge it, it was like, oh, you don't want to acknowledge me? Okay, well, we got to cut some kung fu moves that we're going to use on you, and they began to just, toss me all across the place over there. And I was like, oh,
yeah.
I'm not equipped for this.
That's a good metaphor. I like that one.
But these are the things that we come up with, right? And I know there's probably somebody out there laughing right now. Grief to Greatness put a comment up here. I want to acknowledge that. They said, Dora, they took a course as well. So we got a fellow classmate over there.
She's
And
awesome.
again, we have so many great people up here that are just enjoying, and they're out here doing the work as well, and it's an honor and a privilege over here on Instagram that everybody's tuning in. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comment section, even on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. If you guys have any questions or comments, please put them in the comment section, please. And also, just to get you caught up, this is my guest today, Desiree, and she is talking about being creative in grief. And I think that's a beautiful thing because we oftentimes don't see the creativity in grief, right? We oftentimes it's the hurt that's associated with it, right? And if we can take that metaphor of being creative and look at how we experience grief, it can really be a beautiful, beautiful painting. And what I mean by that, because just like as you said, most people that tune in, they know grief has no rhyme or reason, it has no blueprint. But if you can add color to it and just allow yourself to paint what you're feeling, allow your grief to just communicate to you, as you mentioned before. I want to acknowledge that. If you allow your grief to communicate to you, you realize that there is a different connection out there if you want it. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's definitely there's a connection to what you've lost. And I think that gets stronger as creativity helps you rebuild your connection to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because you mentioned, like our identity just changes every single time with
Right.
every single loss because we have to fill things in. And so you also mentioned flow, which is like the big thing, right? The flow, getting into the flow state,
Right.
which is, that's really what creativity is where everything drops away. You're so focused on what you're doing that everything drops away and your mind gets really quiet. And when your mind gets really quiet, your intuition is allowed to come out and speak. And there is so much information and wealth and wisdom in our intuition
Mm-hmm.
that we don't really, some people do, but it's not very common for us to follow or to listen to our intuition as much as we listen to our thoughts. We listen to our thoughts and our logic more as a whole, I think, than we do our intuition. And when you start listening to your intuition, it's like there's a whole other part of you that knows exactly where to go,
Yes.
right? It
Yeah.
knows exactly what to do and what you need. And so being in that flow state is like, getting a good night's rest. It's like you wake up refreshed. As you come out of it, you wake up refreshed. And I think it's almost the same like in grief. If I'm in a state where I'm really feeling something deeply, I can get into a flow state with that and allow my intuition to say, okay, cry, dance, go for a walk, call a
Mm-hmm.
friend, just without really being conscious. It's just like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. It just came into my brain. That's what I'm going to do because that's what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
I did a project with myself, actually. Everything that I teach, I've done myself. So,
Yeah.
which is, I think, important, because I can think of all these things, but they might not give the same results that my thoughts have, designed them to be.
Right.
So I did this project where I took some clay and I made heads of different emotions that I was really struggling with out of red clay.
Mm-hmm.
And I put them up in my apartment to look at. And for me, one of the things that I think really helps with creativity is like, okay, get it out, get it into some kind of form, put it somewhere. Let that object hold my anger. Let that object hold my pain. Let that object hold my vulnerability. I can release some of it into that object.
Right.
And I can look at it and say, yeah, I feel you. I feel you today. This is what I feel.
Right.
And so after a few weeks of doing that, I'm like, all right, I don't need these, I don't need this crutch anymore. And I brought the heads. I mean, they were small, they were only like this big. I brought them to the ocean and I put them on the shoreline and I watched the waves roll them and back and forward for hours. I watched, and they started disintegrating and deforming and melting and just being absorbed into the ocean until they were gone. And I'm like, okay, that made me feel good. And now when I think of that anger, and now when I think of that pain and all those other things that those heads represented, I'm like, the ocean has them. She has them. She's so much stronger than me. She's so much more powerful than me. She's got me.
Yeah.
She's just got it. She's holding it for me. And so things like that really kind of, you know, they help. They help me. And I'm hoping they will be able to help other people too. Just that release, the
Mhm.
release, the acknowledgement, and then the letting go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Letting go.
I love that right there because we do hold on, right? And I think a lot of times what happens is that we hold on because we don't want to let go of the memory because we think that letting go means that I'm done, right?
Yeah.
I have to, I have to be at a place where I'm okay with everything.
Right.
I say no. I often when I talk to the men that I do talk to, I go, no, letting go doesn't mean that you no longer care. It means that you just come to a place of acknowledging your new life. Now we just have to figure out how do you become who you're supposed to be in this new life?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you paint the picture of what that looks like? Right? Because now you get to design it. Don't mean that you have to let go of the memory.
Right.
You just have to acknowledge.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Because that's the one thing that I think a lot of people misinterpret. That term, letting go and moving forward, right? And accepting. And I really struggle with that word accepting.
Yeah.
For the simple fact that they can have so many mixed meanings. So I just
Yeah.
say, I think David Kessler mentioned this. He goes, there's the sixth stage of grief is acknowledgement.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful thing. It's what you do within those stages of grief. And how do you identify those different stages? Because anger can take on so many different forms, right? And it
Yeah.
can have so many different meanings. You just have to figure out the meaning of that stage of anger.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
and there was a study done, there was a study done on it. And I think they identified 46 different other stages of grief that came along with it. And I said, and that's when, and I think it's something that I figured out long before I saw the article. And I was having a conversation, but I thought I was crazy. To be honest with you, I thought I was crazy. I was like, well, dude, I don't want to bring this up because I could, like, I don't know. Right.
Right.
I'm such a student of this thing that I would go into a situation like I really don't know. Right. And kind of go with the flow of learning.
Mm-hmm.
Which allows me to be able to bring in so much more information, develop tools, and be able to articulate that to other people
Mm-hmm.
in a way to where they can just grab onto them, put them in their toolbox, and be able to use them when they need to, right? Because it's not for me. I realized that within my own grief journey that
Mm-hmm.
I'm such a student of it, and grief is such a mentor to me that every time it shows up, I'd love to just sit with it. Fortunately for me, I fell in love with it, right? I
Yeah.
fell in love with everything about grief, and most people would look at me like I'm crazy and go, "Man, that is grief is not a pretty thing, right? Grief is not fun or anything like that." And maybe it's just the way that I see it, right? but I fell in love with it. It became like a mistress to me. Every time it showed up, I was like, oh, hey, I want to hug you today, right? I want to sit with you. Tell me what you're thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
And then, from there, I became a messenger for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the transference of knowledge to from that situation to learn how to pivot in other people's journey, which allows me to be a great visitor. I would like to think so anyway, to hold that space with them, and to be able to give them something um, that they can always remember,
Mm.
right? They can remember. They can remember me showing up and saying, "Hey, you know what? I got sandwiches. I got some things. You sit there. You do what you got to do. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go take care of all of these things. I don't want you to worry about it. I just want you to sit there. And if you don't need to talk, don't talk. But
Mm-hmm.
other than that, I'm going to talk your ear off, and that's just the way it's going to be, right?" So it's the visitor mindset for me. And then talking with you, it's like and when I think we talked about this before, I'm in a process of doing a project of creativity, expressing your grief through creativity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you brought up the technique with play, because when you said that, it took me back to a place, and I was playing with an animation one day, and I just had a little sphere, right? And this was right around Father's Day, because I celebrated not only that I have Father's Day, but it was my son's 9-year anniversary of him passing. But also, it was 2 days after my mother's birthday as well.
Okay.
Right. So I was like, man, everything just kind of fell in the same day.
That's a lot.
And you would think so, right? But it was something different about it, right? It was like, I could be sad, I could be very depressed, or I can take this moment, these multiple moments throughout this day, and I can remember the first Father's Day I had with my son. I can remember the first Father's Day I had with my mother. Where was I at?
Yeah.
Who was I? And I can look at the transformation throughout the years, and I can see the colors of the wind, right?
Yeah.
And when you mentioned the African drum, it brought me back to a place to where, you know what, that Motown feeling. You know what I'm saying? See, I know you
Can't get
do.
away from it, can you? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I wonder if it's possible to get people back to that, to the connection of music and movement and creativity and understanding grief is a shared human experience. Because you mentioned earlier in your journey, you grew up in a community that's very connected,
Yeah.
right? Everybody showed up, and Desiree, I miss those days.
Yeah.
I miss those days where the community showed up, and I think back then the boomers had it right. They had it right. They were like, "Hey, we're gonna let y'all go out there and figure out life." But when it comes down to it, it still takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
And when we look at the relationships that we've had with our neighbors and family, friends, and things like that, I remember there was a time that I couldn't go anywhere without somebody not knowing who I was, right? So when
Yeah.
I got in trouble, you know what I'm saying? Well, I got my butt whipped all kinds of ways before I got to mom and daddy. And mom and daddy was like, "What happened?" You know what I'm saying? They were like, "Your boy was out there doing this." I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, yeah, really?" And then it was like a community butt whipping. But, I digress. What are we working out? But I remember it coming together after loss. And there would be picnics, there would be food, there would be music. Now, over a period of time, that did change. Um, and I just remember people just kind of looked at life like, "Oh, well, this thing happened."
Mm-hmm.
And there was a disconnect between between the people, right? And I listen to you now, and I'm going, what if the connection was there, but people just did it in solitude?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
often sit around and think about that. What if they did do it in solitude and we just didn't see it? Because I didn't know, just like yourself, I didn't know. I couldn't define grief. I looked at it as a celebration. I look at it as a celebration, but it's who you become during those times when you needed you the most,
Mm. Yeah.
so to speak, right?
Yeah. That's exactly. You hit it right on the head. Exactly. It's who did I need back then?
Right,
What type of and can I be that person for someone else now? And I think the beauty of the community of people that help people in grief is just amazing. I mean, there's no competition. It's like we're there for each other as well as there for our clients and friends and people that we love.
right.
And it's just so it's home. It's home.
It is
It's
home.
really home. Um, you mentioned community, and jeez, I hadn't been to South Hackensack in so long, and I went. I think it was 2018. My husband and I went, and it's like I could knock on any door, and there'd be food and love, and great conversations and laughter and tears, and to this day, those bonds are so strong, and I'm so grateful. And like you, I wish society was like that still,
Mm.
and there's some aspects of it that are, but I don't know if I've ever felt it as strong as I did when I was a kid.
Right, right.
You know?
I
It
think
was,
we're more open to it, right?
yeah,
As kids, we're very curious and intuitive, and we have a sense of innocence that's about us that we lose as life kind of kind of beats on us a little bit,
mhm,
you know, and we develop a sense of survival or victimhood or whatever is required from that version of you that you need during that journey of life, right? And we get away from the simplicity, the truth and the honesty of what life is,
yeah,
and the things that come along with it, that grief journey, they're dealing with the traumas and things like that. It's so hard to see the path that you're on when you got sometimes the people that claim that they love you are the ones that are hurting you.
yeah,
So it's really hard, or you lose the people that love you the most, and you feel very, very lost in the world. Um, I'm not afraid to say this, but you're lost and you're afraid because you don't know where life is going to take you. I know for the longest time, I was so afraid of letting people into my life because so many people were taken away from me that
yeah,
I developed a lone wolf mentality.
hmm,
Began to tell people I'm better off on my own.
hmm,
I've seen so much, I'm better off on my own. And it was easier for me during being homeless to be able to move from place to place,
hmm,
not really not letting anybody get close to me because I didn't understand the purpose of you getting close to me. You're just going to leave anyway.
hmm,
So I, I kept people at an arm's distance, and not understanding people's intentions towards me made me very, very defensive. If I had an idea or any inclination that you were going to try to do something to me, well, I'm going to get you before you get me. Right?
hmm,
And I can say that in a lot of ways, I was wrong. In a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways, it saved my life too. It was just that discernment. I couldn't, everybody looked the same,
hmm,
right?
yeah,
To me, everybody looked the same. So you look just like that person over there. So how am I supposed to distinguish the good ones from the bad ones, right?
Right. Right.
And so, when we go back and we trickle in, now that we're in a place and we've done a lot of work, I can see the beauty of the creativity in life. See, a long time ago, I lost the feelings in my fingers, so I wasn't able to draw. Right. I had to have surgery. I messed up my nerves and everything else. And I couldn't, I can't even hold a pencil anymore because it just falls out of my hand. So I told myself, I said, I had a beautiful gift and I squandered it. It was taken away from me because I wasn't doing anything with it. Now I look at it and they gave me tools like Canva and CapCut and all these other animations, and I'm able to sit down and I'm able to put it back on paper again to see everything that I'm not only feeling, but the transition.
Yeah.
Now, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier when I was sitting around on Father's Day, and I was playing around with one of my animations, and all of these different things were coming, and I developed this spike ball, this ball, and I was able to animate it to where the spikes could come in and out, and things like that, and kind of move around, and things like that. And I thought, that's the way I'm feeling right now.
Huh.
Because my grief is growing, is going back in, and and every time it hits something, it pushes a spike in, but another spike comes out, right? And I was like, you know what? Yeah, I think I'm going to go with that one right there, and I can sit around and watch forever, and I'm excited to see how it continuously transforms.
Yeah.
In this world. I am excited to see what it becomes, right? And if I'm able to articulate it and be able to help someone else through that process, and that's the part that excites me. Can I allow it to change me in a way to where I can become a better servant to show up in other people's faces without letting my ego get in the way of becoming a better student.
Right. Right.
Oh no, I was just sitting around thinking about that. Oh, get your thoughts on it. Then, I know you probably got a long day, so you got some things going on, I'm saying? I could talk to you forever, so.
Well, I think when I think about creativity, it's kind of like water. If there's a crack, it's going to come through.
Right.
Right. And like when you spoke about your fingers, that must have been really difficult. I can't imagine.
It was something that I had to accept. And what I mean by that, I was in a gang. So, these hands right here, I grew up fighting.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in more street fights than I can even count anymore. And then martial arts, MMA, boxing, everything that had to do with fighting, I did.
Mm-hmm.
So when I found out that I had a really bad case of carpal tunnel because my fingers started locking up, and this was a little bit earlier. This is when my son was when he was first born. As a matter of fact, before he was born, I got the surgery, and the doctor told me, you may never get the feeling back in your hands again. It wasn't hard because I had already held myself accountable for what I had done to myself. No one else did it. I did it, right? It was heartbreaking, yes, because I was going, I don't know how to express myself anymore.
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, what am I supposed to do? This is the way that I used to, put what I had inside of me down on paper, because it was easy for me to draw animations or cartoon characters that was fighting in the streets and things like that. I drew my own comic books, right? Even my sister's own comic books. So yeah, when that happened, it was heartbreaking because, I was born with this beautiful thing. I squandered it because I did not know how to let go of the thing that was destroying me, which was the streets. Now, although it destroyed me, it taught me and gave me back so much more. Friendships,
Yeah.
right? The truthfulness of it, being homeless, the going to prison, the being shot, and all of these different things that came along with it. It gave me so much more. And I know it sounds kind of strange, but if you can relate that to the creativity aspect of it, the
Mhm.
people that came and gone, right? How did it affect my life?
Yeah.
It was a beautiful mess. It was a beautiful, chaotic mess, right? And it was something that I learned later on. I had to go back in. I had to finish painting the pieces of my life. I had to be honest with it. And that's where the colors come in. Because not everything was black and white or blues and grays.
Mhm.
Sometimes a picture can have 1,000 different colors because that's how we're made. There's 1,000 different colors that we all express on a day-to-day basis. So what did that look like?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the way I began to look at it. But so then the transition of not having the feeling in my fingers anymore became a lot more interesting,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Because I had to be more creative up here in order to show up in life
Yeah.
authentically who I am.
Right. You had to find that different path, that different way
Right,
to get there.
right.
I remember as a kid, I used to think about, I would lay in bed and I would be like, okay, if I woke up one day and I couldn't see, what would I do?
Mm,
I'd be like, well, I would learn how to play an instrument. Okay. If I couldn't see and I couldn't hear, what would I do? Well, maybe I would sculpt because I could feel, right? I could
mhm,
still, and I would
mhm.
just go through all these things. Well, what if I couldn't do this? Or what if I couldn't do that? And I had to make sure that I had a path, you know?
Right,
It's
yeah,
like I
yeah.
need to be sure that I can keep that connection to release creatively open because that's the only thing I've got going right now. That's like my lifeline.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's where, I mean, people understood me through my art, right? I mean, people understand people through their creations and, things like that. So, um, yeah, I mean, what you're saying, like just being able to find that other way as opposed to being like deflated, you
mhm,
know, by the fact that, oh man, I can't do this anymore. When I got epilepsy, I also had a bad hip. So I couldn't, I paint really big. I mean, this,
understood.
big, I was working on the mural at 6 feet tall by 36 feet long. And physically, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it anymore. And so it was really difficult for me to figure out how to keep myself in balance. And so, in thinking about balance, okay, who's the most famous artist that deals with balance? Well, probably Alexander Calder and his
Mm,
mobiles. So I started making mobiles and thinking about balance and counterbalance. And, where's the center? Where's my center?
mhm.
Am I like off like this? There is balance and counterbalance. When you get thrown off, there is balance. You can find it,
Yeah,
right? It's not going to be the center. It's going to be kind of off, you're counterbalanced, but you're still floating. You're still able to not get pushed around in the wind and lose your way.
right, right.
And so being able to find that within grief, that rhythm, right? It's that rhythm, the up and the
Mhm.
down, and the up
Yeah,
and the down. And okay, you know, this is how it's going to be today. And this is what I'm going to do to help myself, and just ride it, just enjoy your struggle. A friend of mine had a thing up on his kitchen, said, enjoy your struggle. And I was like, well, yeah, yeah, that kind of makes sense, instead of fighting it. And I mean, you have to go through it either way. And, grief is one of those. I mean, I think grief is probably one of the most profound experiences I've ever had in my life.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
and
It's
when you,
honest.
yeah, it's real honest. Yeah, brutally honest.
It's honest.
Yeah.
It's gonna make you emotional. It's going to make you angry. It's going to make you see life from a different perspective. It's going to make you vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's going to make you scared, right? It's going to make you, it's going to make you show up.
Yeah.
If it changes you the right way,
Right.
because you do have a choice in how it changes you. Now, if it changes you and you become bitter, that's totally fine. I tell people this all the time. If you are bitter, it's totally fine. It's fine. You have every right to be bitter. And then if it changes you and you become better, that's totally fine too. You have every right to become better.
Right.
It's yours. That's the beautiful thing about this. Your grief, design it the way that you need it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But don't deny yourself the possibilities
Right.
of what it could be.
Right.
That's why we do the work that we do. Look at the transition from Desiree from when she was a child to where she is now, right? Your grief made you become this phenomenal artist. You saw creativity in your grief. It reminds me of the song in Pocahontas, Can You Paint with All the Colors of the Wind? Right? Think about that. Can you paint? Can you guys paint with all the colors of the wind? Right? You know what I'm saying? Can you experience life in this rawness? Can you, without lying to yourself about who you are, who you're becoming?
Mm-hmm.
That's the beautiful part about this. You can ask yourself any questions that you want, and you can develop your life the way that you see fit. But now, here's the beautiful part about it. And you said something. I'm going to touch on this, and then we're going to wrap it up because we can talk forever. You know, when it comes down to it, here's the beautiful part from back then to where it is now. We have so many amazing people that are out here serving and doing the good work and helping these individuals. There's not a shortage of people to find that can suit what you're going through. It's just a matter of finding the right resources that fits you,
That works. Yep.
that works for you,
Yep.
right? You don't have to do it alone.
Exactly.
You don't have to do it alone. You might find a music teacher or yoga or guided meditation or whatever, holistic healing. You may find creativity. You may find support groups. You may find individuals, but all in all, you don't have to walk it by yourself anymore.
Right.
We want to see the world healed.
Yeah. And
As
I
far
think
as, go ahead.
one of the big things I think, within all that is that realizing that you don't have to stay within a certain feeling, right? You're not going to be stuck there. Even though it seems like it, you're not going to be stuck there.
No.
It's going to change. If you put that effort in and if you move with it, it will change. You will change, it will change, right? Like what you're saying. And yeah.
That's the key.
Yeah.
Desiree, we got to go ahead and wrap it up. See,
Sounds good.
but we have to definitely do this again. Keep me updated on what you got going on.
I will.
And I want to be able to support that. And for everyone who's tuning in today, hopefully you guys found some great stuff in this conversation. And if this is your first time tuning in, do me a favor, head over to my YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification. So you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. And if you know anyone that can benefit from these conversations that we have, please share it with us. This helps us get the word out there and reach a lot more people in the algorithm. And again, thank my guests for being here today. Desiree, thank you for an amazing conversation. Thank you for showing up. And, for everyone else, thank you guys for tuning in. This is going to conclude this episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. And as I mentioned before, and it's I love it that it popped into my head. But as Desiree might say, can you paint with all the colors of the wind when it comes down to your grief? And if so, what does it look like for you? Um, we got another episode coming up here real soon. So you guys stay tuned for that one. It's coming up at 3 p.m. Mountain Time. We're doing a two-fer today. So hopefully you guys, I see you guys in the next one. And again, thank my guest. Her information is in the description below. Please go there, check her out. And get enrolled in some of the things that she got going on. And, we're going to see you guys in the next one. With that being said, you guys have a great day. Hopefully you guys out there making great memories with great people. And don't forget to tell the people that you love them, because you never know what tomorrow may bring. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
Thank you.